Councillor Richard Butler, the Chairman of the Planning Committee. To my left is Councillor Stockwood, who is the Vice Chairman. To his left is Mr Norman, who is our Legal Services Manager. And the lady just sitting down there is Mrs Coop, who is our Constitutional Services Officer. And to my right is Mr Pegram, Service Manager for Communities, and to his right is Mr Hilton, who is one of our area planning officers. And the rest of us are members of the committee, so I hope that's helpful. Perhaps, shall we do a little health and safety, please? Just go on the safe side.
Thank you, Chairman. We're not expecting the alarm to sound this evening, so if it does, we will have to vacate the chamber. Two options. We either go through the doors at the side here, out the front door, and then we congregate at the far end of the concourse area at the front. Alternatively, if that's not available to us, it's through the back, through 3 sets of double doors, turn left, out the door at the side, and then we congregate in the car park in the far corner of the site. I think the message we've given before is follow us, because we'll lead the way.
Thank you very much. And so we'll go on to the items today's agenda. First of all, apologies for absence. Any substitute members, please?
Right, we have apologies from Councillor Greenwood and Councillor Mayles, and we've got Councillor Purdu-Horan substituting for Councillor Greenwood and Councillor Hedgerow substituting for Councillor Mayles, and we also have Councillor Hull substituting for Councillor Mallender.
Okay, we've got that. Thank you very much. Welcome to colleagues to the committee. And any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Councillor Hull.
Thank you, Chair. The first item on the agenda, 1801376/4, I have declared a non-pecuniary interest.
Thank you very much. And I also just realised I have to read a statement out, don't I, at the beginning of these meetings. This is a recording at meetings. The Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014 allows filming and recording by anyone attending a meeting. This is not within the Council's control. Rushcliffe Borough Council is committed to being open and transparent in its decision making. As such, the Council will undertake audio recording of meetings which are open to the public, except where it's resolved that the public be excluded, as the information being discussed is confidential or otherwise exempt. In order to enable the recording, please use the microphones at all times when speaking, and tonight's meeting is being recorded for training purposes only. Basically what that means is we're being recorded. It's the way meetings are done now. All meetings are audio recorded. So if we go on to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of August, are we all happy that they're an accurate, those of us who are here, accurate minutes, happy for me to sign? Thank you. Right, so we'll now go on to the main items of tonight's agenda, which are planning applications that we're discussing. We have an agenda in front of us, and the first item tonight is 1 Fairfield. Oh, Councillor Hull, yes, you're leaving your desk because of your interest. This is 1 Fairfield Street, Bingham. 2-storey rear extension and internal alterations to provide additional office B1A accommodation with alternative A2/B1A use of units. And Mr Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There are no late representations this evening on any of the applications you will have noted. The first one, as you say, relates to 1 Fairfield Street in Bingham. This is the property in question. It's next door to the White Lion Public House on the corner, which is here. The properties here, here and here are in residential use. That is the aerial photograph of the site, just to confirm those details. You'll note that the site is flanked to the north and west by the car park to the public house. The site itself doesn't have any parking within the site. Clearly it's virtually total site coverage of buildings. But when the officer visited the site, it was noted that there are a number of allocated spaces, I think by plaques perhaps, which signify that some of the spaces within the car park are for use by the offices. This is the property in question here. It's currently in an office use. Entrance to the car park is here, and you can see the junction of Fairfield Street just ahead there. That's the property flat on the front. And then looking from the entrance to the car park, so the entrance to the car park is to the left of the photographer here. Looking at the gable end of the application property, it does have an enclosed area to the rear which is open at the moment. When I referred to it being total site coverage, currently there is a yard area, but the proposal would result in virtually total site coverage. Moving round, looking from the car park, you can see the pub in the background. And looking from the rear of the site, looking at the rear of the building, so the access again is over to the left here, with Fairfield Street beyond the building, and the pub in this area here. That's now looking across at the public house premises, and then turning round, looking in a westerly direction. Those are some of the nearest properties. Those are apartments on Chestnut Avenue. Oh, no, it's not the right way. It's just a small yard at the rear of the building. There would be retained a yard for storage of rubbish and that type of thing. And then that's looking down the gable end of the building with Fairfield Street beyond, car park the other side of this fence. Just spinning around again, taking a look at that building. So the extension would cover pretty much most of, if not all of this area here. Removal of this lean-to extension as part of the proposal. And then the details of the proposal are as follows, Chairman. So if I zoom in, makes it easier to see. Oh, wrong one, that one, yes. So the site is the area outlined in red. The existing building is effectively the L-shaped block there. The hatched area is indicative of is the proposed footprint of the extension, and you can see that from the extension to the wall of the apartments to the west is about 25 metres, and to the property to the north here it's a distance of about 23 metres across the car park. Again, I will zoom in because these are quite small. So if we go from the existing layout, so you have the ground floor already in office use, with a little kitchen in that lean-to extension, and offices at first floor. You'll note that in this layout the staircase runs up through here. The proposed layout adds that footprint through there, relocates the staircase to within the extension, freeing up space here to carry out internal alterations to enlarge the office accommodation in those areas. So you end up with 3 offices on the ground floor and a kitchen, and then effectively 3 offices. This one's got a sort of a archway through on the first floor, again with a kitchen on the first floor. Proposal is for those to be used for B1A office use, or A2. The difference is with A2 that involves visiting members of the public, so that can be accountants, estate agents, that type of thing. The site, if I can just locate it on this plan again, is, oh, wrong way. This is the plan from the replacement local plan. I had it earlier. Let me go to the next one because I may find it easily on there. Right, so it's down here. Let me go back to the previous one. And it's therefore, it's outside the conservation area, which is the hatched area. So it's over here. That's it. So it's adjacent to, but not within the conservation area. And the area outlined in blue was the policy of the replacement local plan that sought to protect the retail function of that area. If we go to the plan which is now within the emerging local plan part 2, the yellow area is now the area which is identified as the district centre. The red areas are primary shopping frontages and the blue areas are secondary shopping frontages. The site is not within a shopping frontage, but it is nevertheless within the area identified as a district centre. It's within a highly sustainable area, close to public transport links, and it's considered that it's a sustainable location for an office type use. The proposed extensions are not considered to have an adverse impact on neighbouring properties by reason of overbearing, overlooking or overshadowing, and it's considered that the proposal would not harm the setting of the conservation area. On that basis, Chairman, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. On this application, we don't have any public speakers, so we can go straight into discussion and debate. So who would like to start with this one, please? Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Can I move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman?
You can. Do you have a seconder for your... Councillor Smith. That was very swift. Just to confirm, does anyone else wish to speak on this, or are we happy to go straight to... We've had the recommendation as listed, as shown on page... Oh, sorry, Councillor Jones, yes.
Can we just have clarification about the bin story? Just see that's covered.
Microphone.
Can we just have clarification about the bin storage? I see that's referred to, but it's an obvious thing.
Yes, Chairman, just to clarify, the scheme was amended. Previously there was no dedicated bin storage area. This is Fairfield Street here. I apologise, the plan's gone a little bit fuzzy, but as you can see, in this area here is an area for bin storage. That's been considered by our recycling officer and is satisfied that that is an acceptable level of storage. Looking from Fairfield Street, it's effectively going to be behind those doors, so it's a sort of a nice pair of almost like garage doors with a bin store in behind it.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Hedgerow.
Could I just ask, this is obviously, I think, going to have more staff there. Is there going to be sufficient parking available to them for that, or is it going to finish up with on-road parking for additional staff? And,
I think there's reference, I think, in the report to car parking in the current parking.
yeah, but there's only a very small number of slots.
Yep.
Chairman, yes, there is, as I said in the introduction, there is a degree of parking available within the pub car park. Clearly, the issue here is that this is in a highly sustainable location, so people could use other methods of transport, and we would encourage that, if anything. So they could use the bus or the nearby train station to travel to the site.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Smith.
Just make the point that they're only allowed to operate from the premises between 8:30 and 5:30 in the evening,
Yeah.
so they're hardly going to clash with the pub, I don't think.
Okay, right. Good. Well, thank you for that. Well, we've had the recommendation proposed and seconded. It's shown on page 24. Can we have a show of hands, those in favour of the recommendation? That's unanimous. Thank you. So permission is granted as per the report and recommendation. Oh yes, we need to find Councillor Hull, please. Welcome back, Councillor Hull. It's a good thing you didn't go too far. So our next application tonight, our Eastleigh colleagues are having to move to the other side of the room because it's an Eastleigh application. This is for 5 Ralston Crescent, Eastleigh, conversion of bungalow to 4-bedroom house, including replacement of roof, increasing the eaves and ridge height with dormer windows to front and rear extension, replacement detached garage. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application again relates to 5 Ralston Gardens, Crescent, sorry. Aerial photograph again shows the general layout and character and pattern of development in that area. It is in fact quite a mixed area, predominantly 2-storey dwellings with some bungalows interspersed into in between the houses or at certain points on the development. This is the property in question. Bungalow providing currently single-storey accommodation. You may pick up from other photographs, though, that some of the neighbouring properties here, one has a roof light, There's another one which has dormer windows added to provide some first floor accommodation, presumably. That's looking at a different angle. Again, you can see then one here with dormer windows providing first floor accommodation. And then stepping back a bit further, that's the application property next door to a 2-storey dwelling. Now moving into the back garden, looking across the back of the property towards that property you just saw in the photograph, the 2-storey dwelling. Adjacent the boundary here, they have a garage, outbuilding structures and driveway, I think it is there. Looking back to the rear of the site, those are the properties to the west. I should have just, Chairman, if I can just pause for one moment and make the point there is a typo on page 33 in paragraph 22, which says that the building is positioned between 3 and 5. This is number 5, so it should have read 3 and 7. Similarly, in paragraph 23, it did say that the property shared a boundary with number 2. That's across the road, so that would be a little bit difficult. It is, in fact, number 3 it shares a boundary with. The other aspect, Chairman, just to pick up now while I do this, because it's important to the consideration, this is looking west. Condition 5 does refer to not providing any additional openings, windows, doors, upper levels in the east elevation. Just to correct that, that should read west, looking in the direction that we're looking now. That's turning around looking back at the bungalow with its garage on the right. The proposal does involve the demolition and rebuilding of that garage slightly further back into the site. That's again looking across, picking up that property next door to the north, the 2-storey dwelling, and then looking in a more southerly direction towards the neighbouring bungalows, and as you can see again have roof lights suggesting perhaps first floor accommodation within those properties. Back out on the road, looking up the road, and you can see in the background again properties more typical of this one here. Proposal, Chairman, is to extend and enlarge this property to provide a 4-bedroomed property. That's the existing footprint. There is an increase in the depth of the building by about 2 metres across the width of the building. That garage would be demolished and would be replaced with a new garage positioned further back in the site. There was a previous proposal for this site, again similar nature of development, but incorporated a very heavy gable-ended feature on the front and 3 dormer windows across the back. As a result of concerns raised by your officers, that application was withdrawn, and this is a revised proposal of that development. So again, the large gable feature has gone from the proposal. Similarly, Chairman, in order to preserve the amenities of those neighbours at the back you saw in the photograph, we've negotiated away 2 of the dormer windows. That one serves a bathroom, and the bedrooms on the back of the building would be served by roof lights in that position. The proposal involves an increase in the height of the eaves. So if I go back to that plan, increase in the height of the eaves 1.1 metres to 3.4 metres, and an increase in the ridge by 2.2 metres to 7.3 metres. As I say, the enlargement involves an increase in the footprint across the rear of the building by 2 metres at the rear. That's the current layout, and the proposal, as said, is for effectively 4 bedrooms at first floor, 1 with ensuite accommodation, and living reception rooms at the ground floor with the rebuilt garage in that position. Just to give a sort of a feel for the height of the building in relation to the neighbours, proposal is to keep it at the same height as the ridge height of the neighbouring dwelling. And the garage, as originally proposed, had a roof pitching that way, which would have given a very dominant gable immediately adjacent to the boundary. So again, the garage design has been negotiated to a more subservient appearance, pitching the roof the other way, meaning that the span is less and therefore the overall height is reduced. Chairman, the issue with this one really is the impact on neighbouring properties and the effect of the development within the street scene. Because there is that mix of dwelling characters, and there are two-storey and single-storey properties in the area. It's felt that the proposal is sympathetic to that character, and there's no objection based on the impact on the amenities of the area. In terms of the impact on neighbouring properties, there would be the provision of 3 dormer windows at first floor. They would effectively be looking out across the road at properties on the opposite side. Obviously, the front gardens don't normally have a high degree of privacy. There's not considered to be any conflict with windows given the distances involved. And in terms of any potential overlooking at the rear, if I zoom in a bit, you can also see that the distances are something like just over 10 metres to the boundary, and I think it's somewhere in the region of 19 metres to the back of the property at the rear. That one would be obscure glazed, and it's not considered that the window configuration proposed and the distances involved would give rise to unacceptable overlooking and loss of privacy. On that basis, Chairman, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Again, on this one, we have no public speakers, so we can go into discussion and debate, please. So, who would like to start off with this one? If we don't have the ward member speaking either. The ward member isn't with us, but you will have seen the comments of the ward member in the report who is objecting. So, Councillor Smith, thank you.
I don't see that there's any cause for complaint, really. I've read the report, and I agree that it's sad that we're losing bungalows. I was just saying to Councillor Thurman that back in the 60s and 70s, housing estates had a good mix of bungalows and two-storey buildings, and they are disappearing. Comments have been made at this committee on many occasions, but that isn't grounds for an appeal. So I think, I'm prepared to move the motion to move the recommendation, to grant.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Councillor
as
Smith.
on page 34.
As on page 34, yes, and with the amended east to west reference. Do you have a seconder for Councillor Clark? Oh, did you have? I thought you.
I'll just second it.
Oh, right. So you're happy to second the recommendation, Councillor Bushman? Were you doing that, or did you want?
I was going to do that as well.
Oh, well, another time. Does anyone wish anything else to say on this one? No. I think we'll go to a vote then. A show of hands, please. Those in favour of the recommendation as shown and discussed on 34 and 35, please show. That's unanimous, so permission is granted. Thank you. And yes, Councillor Smith, you were quite right about your comment about sad loss of bungalows, etc. We hear it a lot, but it's not a.
Be good for the lift manufacturers.
It's not something that we can get involved with on at these meetings, but there we are. So musical chairs again now. Okay, so we'll go back onto our next application now, which is 22 Landcroft Lane, Sutton Bonington. This is a variation to condition 2 of a previous planning permission to increase a number of caravans from 2 to 3. And I think Mr. Hilton, you're talking to us on this, aren't you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the item is on page 37 of the agenda, and there are no late representations. So planning permission was granted in 2017 for the change of use on permanent basis of the site to a traveller site, and the retention of an extended area of hard standing. Condition 2 of this approval stipulated that no more than 2 caravans should be stationed on the site, of which no more than 1 should be a static caravan. The application seeks to vary this condition 2 of this application to increase the number of caravans to 3 on the site, of which 1 would be a static caravan. Okay, so the application, the parent application, relates to the area outlined in red, which is obviously part of the traveller site, which is also the area to the top there. Just moving on to the location. So the site is located approximately half a mile to the west of Sutton Bonington University campus. Approximately half a mile to the east of Sutton Bonington University campus, let's get that right. The immediate street scene consists of a cluster of properties along the end of Lancroft Lane. So you've got a ribbon of properties along the north of Lancroft Lane. You've got a few individual properties to the south, but it's by no means an isolated site. Prior to the occupation by the Traveller site, it was an area of paddock, but it has been occupied for a number of years now. The site consists of an area of hard standing with a static caravan and a tourer on site. There is quite a lengthy planning history which is set out on pages 39 and 40 of the agenda. So just going through the site and the surroundings, this is a view across along Lancroft Lane, looking west in a direction towards the university campus eventually. So we're looking across the front of the site. You can just see the entrance in the distance. I don't know if you can make that out. Jump to the next slide. So this is the front of the site. So you can see there's a reasonable degree of screening, a fairly high hedgerow along the front boundary. This is looking east. Looking east down Lancroft Lane across the front of the site. You can see the properties opposite, the ribbon of properties here. Again, another view east, also looking across number 20, which is the neighbouring plot. So this is a view within the site. You can see here we've got a high conifer screen along the boundary of number 24 Lancroft Lane. This is the view looking towards the rear of the site. You've got an area of paddock beyond the hard standing that was previously approved. And then this is looking towards number 20, and you've got the static caravan here and a tourer at the back of the site. And again, it's just looking down the rear boundary of the site, the rear boundary of the hard standing that was previously approved. And then this just shows a view into the neighbouring site at number 20 Lancroft Lane, which is vacant at present. So this plan shows the application site which was considered as part of the 2017 approval in red, and the area in blue which is under the ownership of the Connors. So together that forms number 22 Lancroft Lane. So the application is, like I said earlier, for the addition of a tourer caravan on the site. In terms of representations, these are set out on pages 40 to 42 of the agenda. There's a ward councillor objection, objection from the parish council, along with 2 neighbour objections and 1 neutral response. In summary, the objections relate to potential urbanising effects of the proposal, encroachment of the meadow area to the rear of the site, and concerns relating to adhering to previous conditions and an alleged commercial use of the site. So in assessing the site, the area of hard standing that we can see if we just jump back. So this was established through the 2017 approval. So the extent of the site isn't in question as part of this application. It purely is the addition of a static caravan. Tourer caravan. The use of the site as a traveller site was also previously established on a permanent basis. What I really want to reiterate is that the site would be for the sole use of a single family, so it is just for the Connors family, and the tourer caravan would be solely for the purposes of the family, so not for any additional families or for any other purposes. Like I said before, if we look back at this slide, it's certainly not in an isolated location. There are a number of neighbouring properties. The site is also well screened both to the sides and along the front boundary, and therefore it's not considered that the addition of a caravan on the site would result in a prominent addition from either the street scene or neighbouring properties or the surrounding area. And it's therefore not considered that there will be an urbanising impact or that it would result in an over-intensive development of the site, or that there would be harm to the character of the surrounding area or the open countryside. In terms of highway considerations, it's not considered that the addition of a Tourer would have a material impact on traffic on Landcroft Lane, on vehicle movements, given that it would be for the purposes of an existing family unit. And for the reasons set out in this presentation and in the reports, Chairman, the application is therefore before you with a recommendation to approve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hilton. You may have noticed in paragraph 24 there's a slight typo. It's not a serious one. There's a duplication of part of a sentence about the 6th line down. It says the proposal fails to be considered under policy, and then it goes the proposal falls to be considered under policies. So that's just a typing error, which hopefully Councillor Clark.
Sorry, Chairman. I noticed that the photographs are dated October and November of last year, when the previous application was considered. So have we no up-to-date photographs of the current situation?
Unfortunately, no up-to-date photos of the situation from within the site, but there has been no change in situation from the previous approval.
So the photographs are accurate in terms of Mr. Pegram.
Yeah. Chairman, just one point I'll make. As far as I'm concerned, the photographs are representative of the authorised situation on the site in terms of the site conditions. The only issue is, and I'm sure we will hear about this through the debate, is that there was a requirement to plant a hedge on the back of the site. That still has not been planted. There is also an allegation which is being investigated, which suggests that the hardcore is creeping into the field again, which may not be pictured in those pictures. However, that is not relevant to the determination of this application. That is subject to separate investigations and will be dealt with appropriately. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now, before we go into discussion on this, we do have speakers on this application. We have 2 speakers. We have Mr. Wall, who will be speaking to object to the application, and also the ward member, Councillor Brown. So now is the opportunity for Mr. Wall, if you're here, to address the committee. And the way it works is you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us, and as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button on the microphone, the red light will come on, and the timer will count down. If you're mid-sentence when 5 minutes is up, I have to stop you. So as soon as you're ready, oh, actually, we're just having something handed out to us, I think, aren't we? So. Thank you. So these are related to what you'll be telling us in a moment. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So everyone's got one. Okay. So as soon as you're ready, the clock will start.
During the last 20 years, I've lived with my family on Landcroft Lane. I've seen the site steadily transform from a field into a commercial compound it is today, without any regard to the countryside setting it is in, or indeed the conditions which have been applied to each planning application or repeal decision. It must be noted that the siting of the static van has always been outside the authorised curtilage, and has only been legally sited with the permission of the last application in 2017, as shown on the site plan, by default. The LPA have failed to ensure that any of the conditions set have been adhered to, and the site is now further extending into the field with various equipment, vehicles, stone. The site should align with number 24 on the south-east side of the boundary and protrude by 7 metres on the eastern side with number 20. In the most recent appeal in 2012, the inspectorate stated that the extension of the site was unacceptable, but granted the application temporarily to allow the LPA to source other sites for travellers. The LPA failed to do this and made a decision to grant permission which was against the inspectorate's guidelines. This view by the LPA on this application is completely opposite to their previous views, yet again showing inconsistencies. With this appeal, it was also stated, I am satisfied that the extension would unacceptably increase general or traffic noise, such as to diminish the character of Landcroft Lane as a quiet lane. There is no justification for an additional van, and the accommodation on the site should be quite adequate for Mr. Connors and his dependents. The inspectorate at the appeal in 2012 stated, the appellant's need for more accommodation cannot mean that any extension to the existing site would be acceptable. If this site is allowed to increase, then certainly it would follow another extension of the site that would be applied for at a later date. That I am certain. And the enlargement of the site would continue to go on in this systematic way as it has done for the past 11 years. We are of the opinion that the LPA has acted appallingly, and as such we urge the committee to refuse this application on the grounds of overdevelopment, lack of control by the LPA in any shape or form. The application is contrary to the 2012 appeal when the inspectorate clearly stated that any further development would be unacceptable and cause harm to the character of the area. I was going to say, following this, you'll probably hear from the LPA recommended it goes through with conditions attached. Please be aware that the conditions do not count for anything and will be disregarded by the applicant as they have been for the past 11 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. It was well within your 5 minutes, so well done on that. Could you just press the button not to turn the microphone off? Thank you very much. So our next speaker on this is the ward member for the area, Councillor Brown, and well, you know how it all works. Again, you've got up to 5 minutes as soon as you're ready to start, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am very disappointed that this application is before you this evening. Due to the inaccurate information submitted by the applicant, this application should have been rejected by officers on receipt. I would like to know why this never happened, or is it a case that they were never spotted, and if so, why? The application is incorrect by saying that it cannot be viewed from the footpath at the rear of the site. May I refer to the inspector's report, APP 2182685 and 2182683, paragraph 44. The site is visible from the footpath some metres away at the rear of the paddock, and clearly, according to the inspector, it can be seen. The site layout plan of the current application clearly shows hedgerow planting. No hedgerow exists, again inaccurate information, and the hedgerow was a condition from previous applications and has not been adhered to, the applicant ignoring enforcement notices. On the grant permission notice 1702133 full, paragraph 6, no commercial activity shall take place on the land, including storage of materials. This is happening daily and has been reported to the council many times by neighbours, but the enforcement team have failed to act. Also referring to the same grant notice, paragraph 2, no more than 2 caravans as defined on the Caravan Sites and Control of Development Act 1960 and the Caravan Sites Act 1968 as amended, with no more than 1 shall be static or mobile home, shall be stationed at any time within the curtilage of 22 Lancroft Lane. It also goes on to say, it is not considered that the site possesses sufficient amenities or is otherwise suitable to accommodate an additional independent unit of accommodation and also to comply with policy GB2 criteria of the Rushcliffe Borough non-statutory replacement local plan. Paragraph 48 of the inspector's report said, I'm satisfied that the extension would unacceptably increase general or traffic noise so as much to diminish the character of Lancroft Lane as a quiet lane. I conclude that the development causes unacceptable harm to the character and the appearance of the surrounding area. These are the words of the inspector, not mine. I can also reveal to this committee that following a land registry search by the lawyers working for number 20 Lancroft Lane, where permission has been granted by this committee to build a house, the land registry search shows that the boundary of number 20 is 5 metres east of the boundary shown on the applicant's plan, which puts the boundary of number 20 Lancroft Lane through the middle of the applicant's mobile home, making the applicant's site smaller, also making the parish council and my own objections of overdevelopment even more so. Excuse me. Should this committee be deciding on an application which is very likely to be involved in a legal challenge on the boundaries of the applicant's site? Mr. Chairman, members, you have heard from Mr. Wall, and I fully concur with his objections. The parish council also objects, and so do the residents along Lancroft Lane. And I'm urging members to reject this application on its inaccurate information, as well as any legal boundary dispute that is likely to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. That's well within 5 minutes as well, so thank you very much. So we heard from Mr. Wall and Councillor Brown, who are objecting to the application. They referred to the history of the site, made various comments about previous applications, permissions, appeals and enforcement conditions, referring to unauthorised storage of materials. They comment on that there's no justification for an extra van and quoted some comments from the inspector's report. Councillor Brown is disappointed the application's here. He feels it should have been rejected immediately. And also we heard about some boundary disputes. Some of these issues aren't necessarily material planning conditions, but I think we ought to just pick up on some of them. So, Mr. Pegram, are you going to do that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I'll take some of these issues, not necessarily in the order they were raised. The issue about whether the site is visible from the footpath, that appears in a section of the application form that relates to site visit, it's entitled. And it says, can the site be seen from a public road, public footpath, bridleway or other public land? The applicant has answered no. Now, as you saw from the photographs, it's not easily visible from Lancroft Lane. You can get distant views from the footpath at the rear. However, Chairman, that part of the application form is not part of the assessment of the proposal or the impact on the surrounding area. That part of the form is to inform the need or otherwise for our case officer to make an appointment to carry out a site visit and meet either the agent or the applicant on site. That is purely what it's for. It does not form part of the assessment. Just taking some of the other issues, Chairman. So we've established the site can be viewed from a distance across the fields from the footpath. The hedgerow planting, if I can borrow the mouse a second, that is referred to, on the previous approval by the inspector and we repeated it when we gave permanent consent for the extension, there is supposed to be a hedge planted along the back. And as you saw in the photographs, the photographs from last year, but equally recent inspections, that hedge has not yet been planted. There is also allegations of commercial use of the site, storage of commercial vehicles. There is a play equipment in the field here, which is in our view unauthorised on 2 counts. One is it's a raised platform above 300 millimetres, and it also suggests potential change of use of the land. Chairman, all of those issues plus more possibly, are the subject of investigations by your enforcement officers. The planning system is not intended to be used punitively, i.e. if someone does not follow the regulations or does not comply with their conditions, you should not punish them by either taking disproportionate action or refusing a planning application. This application is for a single touring caravan, additional single touring caravan within the site. As Mr. Hilton said, the extension to the site has been established through a permanent consent now to keep the hard standing there permanently. It's a site to be occupied and to continue to be occupied and conditioned to be occupied by a single gypsy family. The ward councillor suggested that the application should be refused on grounds of inaccurate information. That would not be a sustainable or reasonable ground to refuse permission. Similarly, there was issues raised about land ownership and the suggestion that this boundary here is 5 metres too far west, which means it should be somewhere through here. Again, Chairman, we have checked, officers have checked, and I understand the inspector checked the dimensions of the site based on the planning application submission. So we are concerned with whether or not the site complies with this plan. If there is a separate legal dispute, that would be a separate matter. And if that resulted in proving that the site was too large, then the applicant may have to indeed come back to vary the siting of his static caravan. That again, Chairman, is a separate matter to be dealt with by separate legislation and would not be a reasonable ground to refuse planning permission. It's a bit like you've heard me say many times before, there may be a covenant on a property that restricts a certain type of development. That covenant does not prevent us from granting planning permission for that type of development, but it's then down to the owner of the property to go away and deal with that covenant through separate channels. That's not a dissimilar situation to what you have before you here, Chairman. Chairman, I would say that we do not condone the fact that the applicant has not complied with some of his conditions and has carried out some unauthorised development over the years. The enforcement officer did pay another visit or viewed the site from you can't visit at the moment because the family is away travelling, but he did view the site from the rear in light of some of the additional comments that have been made in an email to him. All he could see at the time of that site visit was one ride-on lawnmower somewhere in this area. There were no other commercial vehicles that he could see on the site as a result of that site visit. There is a condition on the permission that says that they can't carry out commercial activities from the site. That doesn't necessarily mean, for instance, that they can't bring home, as you saw in the photograph, a transit van that might be used for commercial purposes. That would be no different to me if I took my work vehicle home in the evening. That's not an indication of a material change of use of the site for commercial purposes. Chairman, to stress, you must consider this application on the basis of the submitted information and the proposal that is before you, not what might be or what might have happened in the past. The application is for a single touring caravan. It's to be used incidental to the occupation of the site by the Connors family. I am confused by the inspector's comments, I have to say, in terms of impact on the highway network. If it's a single touring caravan to be used for additional overspill accommodation, I can't see myself that generates any, if not significant vehicles on and off the site onto Lancroft Lane. Chairman, it's before you with a recommendation, as Mr Hilton stated, that permission is granted on the basis that an additional touring caravan would not adversely affect the character of the area or give rise to an overdevelopment of the site. Hopefully, Chairman, that clarifies some of the points that were made.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. Yes, I think it does. It certainly is a site that various planning committees over the years has had a lot of discussion about, as we have heard and read. So we can go into discussion now. My first speaker on this is Councillor Jones, please.
I mean, I have some sympathy for gypsies or possibly travellers. And in principle, I can't see a huge problem, but it does bother me that it seems balmy to be giving approval when the conditions of previous approvals have not been met. We've got members of the public saying there's an unauthorised layer of stone beyond the site. We've got condition 3 which refers to the extended site area. Now, I know it refers, as planners do, to the site plan in condition 2, but for most people, that phrase, the extended site area, is open to wide interpretation. So I'm quite bothered about that the wording of that condition, B, the lack of the hedge, and C, the apparent unauthorised area of stone. And given we've not been given photographs or any current evidence of the current state of the site, it does bother me whether we should be approving this at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I don't know if you want to come back on that. Again, we can only... the way it works is we have to make decisions on the information we have, and as per the application. But your comments are noted, and so I understand your comments as well. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pegram gave some very full responses to the points that have been made by the member of the public and by the ward councillor, but I might have missed it, but I didn't pick up any comment about the ruling by the inspector at the appeal 5 or 6 years ago, and I did just wonder, when Mr. Pegram and his colleagues were looking at this application, what weight they gave to the inspector's ruling then that should be no more than 2 caravans, and if they put little weight on that, the extent to which we as a committee should be considering the inspector's comments as a material consideration in reaching our decision.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. So, what weight on the comments by the inspector at the previous hearings, please?
So, careful consideration was given to the previous appeal decisions, both the refusal for the dismissed appeal for the enforcement case and the appeal that was allowed for the reduced area of hard standing and for 2 tourists on the site. Key consideration really is paragraph 61 of the inspector's appeal decision, in terms of just ensuring that that it is for. Bear with me a second, right? So just stressing that it is for the personal needs. So whilst a number of issues have been set out, that is outweighed by the personal needs of the Connor family. I don't believe that situation has changed. Clearly, the permission is tied to that family, and that condition is being carried through. There's no change to that. So yeah, that has been carefully considered.
Chairman, if I can add to that as well. Again, you heard that the inspector gave a temporary permission for the extension and the additional caravan on the basis that it would give the authority time to identify additional sites for gypsy and traveller families. That would be, in my view, very relevant if this was an application for an additional gypsy family site or pitch. This is not, as Mr. Hilton has explained, this is for additional ancillary accommodation to meet the needs of the existing family. The existing family has the benefit of a permanent consent on this site, so it's not a case really. You could take the view perhaps they need a bigger site, we should identify bigger sites for them. They've got a permanent consent to live on this site. It's not for an additional pitch, so it's not even, the additional caravan is not contributing to our need for gypsy pitches in the area. It's already established as a gypsy pitch for a single family. And I think that, to me, is the crucial factor that we took into account previously when we decided about extending the site, and also the critical issue about now recommending approval for an additional caravan, emphasising that this remains for a single gypsy family. So the issue about whether there would be additional sites identified in the future, it seems to me unreasonable to suggest that the gypsies should move from this site. They have a permanent benefit of a permanent consent and can stay here as long as they wish. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. So again, it's a differentiation between enforcement and
To a certain extent.
to a certain extent, and the planning application that's been looked at the time. That's the big difference. Councillor Hetherington.
Yes, what I am not clear about is how we as a council and our officers are going to modify, actually take care that this is a true case, that only the family are going to be allowed to use it, and you're not going to get one of their friendly travellers coming in and parking their caravan overnight because they're on a transit to somewhere else. And I don't see how we can actually get round to actually monitoring it ourselves as a council to enforce it.
Sorry, Chairman, I have to emphasise again, you have to consider the application on the basis of the terms of the application. This is an application for a caravan to meet the needs of the existing family. The fear of an additional gypsy family moving onto the site would not be grounds to refuse this application. That would be dealt with through enforcement action subsequently if that occurred.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, or has that answered your point?
Well, the only concern is that somebody comes along and parks a caravan on that site at night because they are in transit somewhere else. I don't think we've got any powers to actually monitor it in the area.
Chairman, I can see the point that Councillor Hedgerow is making. I guess I would liken that to if my relatives from down south came and stayed with me for a weekend or something. If an additional caravan turned up on that site, I'm reasonably confident that we would get phone calls to alert us to that in the first instance. We would investigate that, and if it transpired that it was a friend visiting for a night or a weekend, that's, in my view, the proportionate response to that, which we are required to consider a proportionate response, would be to say, OK, it's a visitor, they're not breaching any conditions, they've gone now, therefore no action is necessary. The converse to that would be if an additional large caravan turned up and another family started living there, clearly in breach of the condition, the proportionate action then would be to seek breach of condition action, either a breach of condition notice or an enforcement notice for breach of planning control.
Thank you. And again, we have to be careful not to go into the what if type of scenario. And I know it's very easy to do that because it's perfectly natural to think that. My next name on here is Councillor Hull, please.
Thank you, Chair. Am I right in saying that the picture that you've got up here now, with all the hard standing on it, with all the hard standing that goes right down, that is the red line on this map, is it? The bottom, that is the bottom of the red line.
Yes, that's correct.
It is.
The rear of that hard standing is the
red line.
Is the red line. The extent of the red line.
So the location of this proposed touring caravan would be more or less in the place where those cars are right now. Is that right?
Well, yes, it would be on that area of hard standing. So it would potentially, yes.
It didn't matter which orientation or anything like that. I'm just thinking, if you're saying that there is a footpath at the back there that can look onto this site, they're going to be looking at the caravan side on. Or it doesn't matter, whichever.
Chairman, I think again, just to explain our rationale behind this one, we've taken the view that these are touring caravans. I think if we were to put a specific condition on that said it has to be 3 metres from the south boundary and 2 metres from the west boundary or something of that nature, and it moved, we'd have to consider whether we enforced. I think the issue being is that in terms of, if we use this plan as the reference, effectively that was the extent of the authorised site from the around about 2008-9 permission, I think it was, and there was potentially a caravan in that position. The extension of the site facilitates the provision of an additional caravan, or possibly even 2 caravans in that area. The view that, as I say, that we have taken to a certain extent is because they are mobile structures, we've got to consider the enforceability of any condition, and if, for instance, that caravan suddenly was there, we might get a complaint. Do we enforce against that? So in terms, I think we've taken the view, yes, if you look across the fields, that was the most prominent part of the site from the fields if there's caravans in there, but it is an established gypsy site with a permanent permission.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Councillor Clark, you indicated to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm still confused. Easily done, I know, but trying to find my way through the applications, stroke appeals, stroke decisions, stroke enforcements on page 40 is not easy, because this application is to vary conditions to increase from 2 to 3. They are mobile structures. We're not being asked to approve an actual sighting of a vehicle, and we don't know what the definition of a family is. It could be absolutely anything. You know, where do you stop quoting relations? I've no idea. I don't know how big my family is. You know, how many relations have I got? I've no idea. The original application and the permission was for 2 caravans, and that was upheld by an inspector. I don't understand why we're now proposing, or that there is an approval to increase that, because Mr. Pegram said it is for the family use. Well, next year you get another caravan. The year after you get another caravan. You end up with 6 caravans. How do we determine what is a family and what is not a family? Because at the end of the day, these are just structures that are being used as an annex to the main permanent static home. So I don't know how we actually view this and how we should assess this, because in my view there is no end to it. It is not merely a case of considering this application. This is an application to vary a specific ruling that was made a year ago. And it was upheld by an inspector, so why are we suggesting that we go back on that? Because if we go back on it, that sets the precedent for going back on everything. And in terms of the size of the family, I'm sure that I was going to say the neighbouring houses, don't have to be neighbouring houses, any house, in theory, so we just keep adding on more extensions to a house. There is no finite end to it.
Yes, Mr. Pegram is anxious to come in with an explanation on this, I think.
Chairman, I understand Councillor Clark's concerns. I could have perhaps cut it a little bit short by coming a bit earlier. I think it's referred to as a site for a single gypsy family, and a lot of paperwork, and possibly even in the inspector's decision. The crucial definition or restriction, in my view, is condition 4 on page 45, which says that the occupation hereby permitted shall be carried out only by Mr. Felix Connors and his resident dependents. If it was an uncle, an aunt, a granny or something, I'm not sure I would consider that to be a resident dependent. To me, resident dependents principally is children that live with him as part of his immediate family. So the other aspect is clearly, as planning authority, yes, we are saying now yes to an extra caravan, or recommending yes to an extra caravan. If they wanted more, they have to come back to us to apply for that, and it's under the control and the gift of this authority as to whether or not they give them that permission. So, as I say, hopefully condition 4 helps to clarify how big the family might actually be.
Councillor Clark.
So is that a recognised, set in stone definition of the word dependence?
It's a recognised condition that's used in these circumstances.
Is that possible to be upheld in a court of law?
We have to consider whenever we impose a condition, and as did the inspector before us, whether or not the conditions satisfy the 6 tests set out in the National Planning Practice Guidance, including enforceable. In my view, Chairman, yes, that condition is enforceable. It can be upheld, and the fact that the inspector has considered it appropriate, my view or my personal opinion would be yes, it could be upheld in a court of law if we ended up in a situation where we served an enforcement notice, they didn't comply with it, and we ended up in the magistrate's court. Thank you, Chairman.
So could I just, Chair, for clarification purposes, paragraph 7 on page 40, the very last phrase talks about the inspector taking the view that the development represents an unduly large extension of the site. Was that purely in relation to the hardcore standing that was previously mentioned? Because I find that some of the references are difficult to follow. So I just wanted to distinguish, does that relate purely to the hardcore standing, or does it actually relate to number of vehicles?
Okay, so that reference is to the first of the 2 appeals, and it was in relation to the enforcement case, and it is in relation to the extended area of hard standing. So that beyond the reduced area that was submitted as a planning application. So yes, it is in relation to the hard standing.
Just to clarify that point, Chairman, the application did result as a result of an enforcement investigation. The area of hard standing that had previously been laid was larger than what is now authorised, so there were 2 appeals. One was an enforcement notice against the extension of the site. The other appeal was against the refusal of planning permission for a lesser area, which is the area shown on that slide.
Councillor and Mrs Smith.
Thank you. Right, we've got a definition then of what a family is. It's the parent and the dependent children. What age do they cease to be dependent? Because I'm thinking to myself, if this is going to be used for accommodation, I don't know how large the family is, but I would be concerned if young children were being left to sleep on their own in a caravan.
I'm not sure if that's a planning matter per se, the age of the children, and if there's any sort of worries about welfare of children in caravans, gypsy sites, and so on and so forth, that would surely be dealt with by a different agency, I would think, possibly. I'm just talking here from my understanding. Well,
could I just
whether it's something that we can get involved with to that detail as a planning committee, where we are having to decide whether we are going to allow an additional caravan at this site. I'm not sure if that comes into it, but Mr. Pegram. Oh, right. Okay.
I'm just looking something.
We're looking up on the computer.
Mr. Pegram's looking, could I just come back and say, I know it's not this particular application, but something very similar happened in Radcliffe, and that site's grown and grown and grown, and I think it's got 12 caravans, hasn't it, and 12 lorries and 12 cars on it now.
Yes, and again we're venturing into the dangers of the known or the unknown, what might happen in the
Chairman, I would not want the committee to be misled by that statement. No. The site at Radcliffe-on-Trent was for multiple families associated with the Doherty family. My understanding of that site was it was originally granted for 6 vans. Yes, we have recently granted an increase in the number on that site to take it to 12 vans because of, yes, the needs of that particular group of travellers that live at that site. Chairman, a word of caution, and I have to raise this. I think you should look upon this, in my view, you should look upon this no differently to if number 24, for instance, wanted to put an extension on the back of their house for a growing family. The status of the applicants is irrelevant here. Who they are, what they are. This is effectively, my understanding of this is that there is a need for a caravan for a growing family, i.e. an additional child or children. And that is the basis on which you should consider this application. Not on, and I reiterate, what might have happened. We don't condone at all, and I stress that, Chairman, we do not condone what they've done in terms of breaching conditions, possible breach of planning, possible land ownership issues. Then the land ownership issues are not relevant to this. You must consider this application on the basis of what it is. It's for an additional caravan on this site for the growing family. I'm just trying to find the definition of resident dependent, Chairman, but I would take that to be anyone who lives with the family as a child or a sibling of that family at the moment. If I come across anything different, Chairman, I'll let you know.
Right. Let's get back to the application that we have in front of us, and as frustrated as we all are when we know that in the past breaches have been carried out and all the rest of it, when you're deciding a new application, you can't penalise, for want of a better word, of what's happened in the past. We are here discussing a planning application of what's in front of us at the moment, but I do understand where people are coming from with the emotions and the comments, the what ifs, and also what may or may not have happened elsewhere. Let's move on to Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really building on the comments you've just made, we've had an extensive debate here. We're being asked to consider an additional touring caravan on what is, by any standards, a large site. There is sufficient hard standing there. I understand all the concerns and worries about it and the future and the past, but on that basis, I would move the recommendation that permission be granted.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Would you have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Stockwood. Thank you. I think had Councillor Jones. Jones, what did you want to speak again on?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something, and it is about the definition of dependence. Mr. Pegram's made the point that you should view this as an extension to an ordinary house. With such an extension, you wouldn't normally have condition 4. And the reality is you have got condition 4. And if that was defined as his his dependent relatives, or the relatives who are dependent on him, then I could understand it. Has the applicant told you who he envisages to be his resident dependents?
We're just looking the application up now. I'm bound to say that if permission was given and that condition was in there and it wasn't being adhered to, then we would be in a potential enforcement situation.
Yes,
again, wouldn't we? But again, we can only discuss on the facts that we have for the application. Did you want to add to that?
So the applicant hasn't confirmed exactly who it would be for, so other than being for a co-dependent.
Chairman, Mr. Hilton has checked the application file and it's not specified in the application file. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding from the enforcement officer's involvement was it was an additional child or a child of the family that is a resident dependent of the family.
Okay, Councillor Jones, is that helpful?
No, it's very vague, just like the photograph.
Okay. Councillor Clark, I think you wanted to come back.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on Mr. Pegram's analogy of if this was a traditional house with extensions, etc. And I I'd already had that in mind, but it begs two questions for me. Probably the first one I know the answer, as to whether sewerage or wastewater disposal is a material consideration in this application. But secondly, it talked about, building an extension to a house. So that might be done under, that could happen, and then in that extension, that application, when we approve it, we remove permitted development rights. So if that happened in a normal traditional house extension, we remove permitted development rights. What's the equivalent of removing permitted development rights in this situation?
I think Mr. Norman might be able to help us with that. Or you wanted to make a comment?
If I could just make a comment, Chairman. The nature of this application is not an application for planning permission for development. As Councillor Clark has rightly pointed out, we're talking here about a chattel, effectively, a caravan that can move around the site. The way to think of the application, and all analogies break down, Mr. Pegram's analogy to an extension that goes so far, but with all analogies, they break down somewhere. With an application for an extension, that is development, building an extension. Here, the application is to change a condition. The conditions are addressing not development as a built extension or whatever, or even a material change of use. The conditions are seeking to control the activity on the site. So you have a planning permission, I think it's the 2017, I haven't seen the whole permission, with a set of conditions to it. The application is to change that planning permission. It's a planning permission for the same development that was granted in 2017, but let's have a different set of conditions on it, is what's been applied for. Then the scope for this committee is to consider whether it will approve the condition applied for, if you like, or the change condition, or to grant planning permission for the same development but with a different set of conditions. So it can either refuse the application, grant the application with the new condition applied for, or indeed grant planning permission for the 2017 development, whatever it was, with a different set of conditions. So I think the analogy is helpful, but it breaks down because we're considering here conditions which is relating to activity on the site and how that is controlled effectively. I hope Mr. Pegram agrees with what I've said, but I hope that helps.
Does that help, Mr. Pegram?
Chairman, I do agree with everything that Mr. Norman said. I was not trying to suggest it's exactly like a condition, only that, like a family living in a house might want additional accommodation, that is the scenario you have before you here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, all these comments just leave me with the thoughts and the words, basically, shotgun and planning legislation.
That is your view, and you're absolutely entitled to it. Councillor Thurman, you indicated to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, really speaking, there's plenty of room on the site for another caravan. And I think what is fouling our situation is the fact of the enforcement and the previous activity, and it's kind of clouding our view, I think. Does the paved area that we've seen on the photographs, does that continue right to the road?
No. There is, let me go back perhaps, there's effectively there's a verge before you get to the running carriageway, so the
it's inside of the gate.
If we go back to the other way, we've got one facing
the photo
forward.
that's shot there, does that continue right to the front of the plot to the road?
Yeah, I was just trying to find one that points. No, it doesn't go right to the road. It goes to the front of the plot, to the foot of the hedge, but it doesn't come out to the edge of the. So this is the edge of the carriageway. So it doesn't come out there. It's behind the hedge, basically.
Yeah, but it comes within their boundary to the road.
Yes.
To the hedge. Fine. But we've already been told that the static caravan is in the wrong place. So that's starting point one, really. And that the site has continued into the back with hardcore. And I mean, there's so many issues here which are really clouding the view we're trying to take. But having said that, there's enough room on the plot to take another caravan from my point of view.
And again, that is the application that we are discussing this evening.
I know.
We're all aware of the background. We're all aware of what's been going on in the past. Let's be honest, we're all probably thinking what may well happen or may not happen in the future. Sorry, yes.
What are the likelihood of the issues that are prior to this being cleared up or concluded?
Your hand went up, Mr. Pegram.
Yes, Chairman. We still have an open enforcement file on this site. My officers are still working on those issues which need to be resolved. The situation is somewhat frustrated to a certain extent by the fact of the family travel at certain times of the year, and therefore, unfortunately, I have to admit, the investigations and any resolution to those investigations has unfortunately been protracted partly by that factor. But rest assured, Chairman, I mean, what I would say is, I know Councillor Jones was concerned that we haven't got up-to-date photographs, but there was a bigger area of hardcore beyond that point there, which was the subject of a previous enforcement notice. That enforcement notice was complied with. There is a suggestion, Chairman, now from the neighbour that is creeping again into the field. My officer could not see. He went recently this week to the footpath that runs across the rear, and you cannot see clearly what the extent of that is. He has an arrangement with Mr. Connor that when Mr. Connor returns from his travelling, he's going to contact him, make an appointment so he can go out on the site and inspect the current situation. But as I say, we have an open case, we are investigating, and if things do not progress, we will take the appropriate action, as we have done in the past, which proved on that occasion to be successful because they removed the hard standing.
So enforcement does work.
It does work, Chairman.
Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Of this site, thank you. I'm not aware of the history of the site, but I have to say I'm just as confused as some people, and I found the comments from our officers and information extremely helpful, which has helped me at this stage make up my mind. I'm sure that I take the point that appropriate action can always be taken, and I'm fully aware what appropriate action means and how long it takes. And I think on this occasion, it is an over-intensive proposal. I think there are plenty of opportunities in the future to submit further planning applications to meet the requirements of Rushcliffe Borough Council, who I'm sure wish to be fair with all applicants, and I'm sure our officers can assist the applicant with appropriate conversations in the future. But at this moment in time, I think it's been a premature application and does not convince me that it's not over-intensive. So I won't be supporting this application.
Okay, well, thank you
on
for
this occasion.
No, that's what we're here for, right? It's support or not support, as the case may be. Right, I think we've had a considerable discussion on this, and there's a danger of repeating ourselves several times. The proposal, or the recommendation, has been proposed and seconded as per the way it works by Councillor Edwards proposed it and Councillor Stockwood seconded the recommendation. I think, unless anyone is desperate to speak on this, I think we'd better go to a vote on this. Are we with us? Are we with it? Yes. So, ready to? You're happy to continue with your yeah. Okay. So we'll go to a vote. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour of the application as per the report and recommendation on here, please show. 6. And anybody against? 5. So that's, and no, to confirm, any abstentions? No, I don't think there were. So that's 6. So permission is granted, but I must emphasise that this is permission for the application that is in front of us now. And it's all very well people marching out like that, but that is the situation we are in. And I hope you will agree we've had a big discussion on this and covered all the points. Thank you. We'll move on. I think this is our final application tonight. This is 31 Asha Lane, Reddington, a single-storey side and rear extension. Mr. Hilton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the item is on page 47 of the agenda. Again, there are no late representations for this application. So the application seeks planning permission for a single-storey side and rear extension that would wrap around the rear corner of the building. So the application relates to a 2-storey semi-detached property situated just south of the centre of Reddington, within a predominantly residential area. There is a detached outbuilding to the rear of the property, which shares the boundary with the adjoining property. So the boundary runs through the middle of that. A driveway runs along the side of the property, leading to a detached garage at the rear. The street scene to the north consists of a number of similar semi-detached properties. So you might be able to just make out on this aerial photo. I'm going to go to some more clearer photos in a minute, but from this aerial photo you've got semi-detached property here, and these ones, which are all very similar in form. I'm just going to go through the site photos in detail and set out the proposal. So this is a view from the front. So you can see the neighbouring semi-detached property, which is identical in form. You've got a driveway leading from the road, which has got space for at least 2 vehicles, leading to a detached garage to the side. It's a view from the rear garden, looking at the back of the property. So you can see to the right-hand side there is the outbuilding which straddles the boundary with the adjoining neighbour. This is panning round, viewing the neighbour to the right-hand side at number 33 Asha Lane. From this photo, you can see that it's got a blank side wall facing onto the driveway of the application site. This is actually a 2-storey side extension which links into a single-storey rear extension that similarly wraps around the corner of the property. So this is just looking at, out from to the back of the site. And then this is a view looking across the back of the property towards number 29 Asha Lane. You can see there's a brick wall linking between the outbuilding, which is approximately 1.6 metres in height. Proposed extension would fill the gap between the rear wall and the outbuilding. And then this is a view from the adjoining neighbour at number 29, looking back at where the proposed extension would be. This is the rear kitchen window of number 29. And then this is a view out from the kitchen window of the neighbour, looking towards the shared outbuilding and the site of the proposed extension. So just moving on to the proposal in a bit more detail. So we've got a ground floor plan here. Again, just showing that the extension would project 3 metres from the back of the property, 2.6 metres from the side. The last ½ metre would be linked into the outbuilding, which would be retained as part of the development. Got a monopitch roof wrapping around the building there. And then just jumping to here, we've got this is the front view, side elevation, and rear view. In terms of the impact on the adjacent neighbour at number 29, this is the view that's from that property. So the consultee comments on this application are set out on page 49 of the agenda. We've got an objection from a ward councillor and a neighbour, no objection from the parish council. In summary, the concerns relate to the intensity of development, a potential overshadowing, loss of light to the neighbouring kitchen window at number 29. So, as stated before, there's a detached building to the rear of both properties. The extension would fill a 2.5 metre gap. As I say, it's a fairly modest 3 metre extension in total, but the last half a metre would be effectively screened from number 29 by this shared outbuilding. So there is a kitchen window close to the boundary, as I said before. But if we look at this slide, we can see that the kitchen window faces onto this outbuilding, which already restricts any outlook towards the rear garden and to a degree impedes on light. So, looking at the proposed extension, yes, it would impede oblique views across towards number. From the adjacent neighbour towards the application property. But it wouldn't restrict the outlook towards their rear garden. In terms of overall loss of light, it's not considered that there would be a significantly greater loss of light as a result of the extension linking between the existing outbuilding and the back of the property. So, as I mentioned before, the adjacent neighbour at number 33, let's try and find the right slide, has got a very similar arrangement. Unfortunately, it's not clear from this photo, but there is, as I say, 2-storey side, single-storey rear. The rear extension actually links, this is a semi-detached property as well, rear extension links into a neighbouring outbuilding, so it's similar, although it's obviously the opposite way round to this property. There's also an example at number 13. Obviously, we have to consider each application on its own merits, but there are I'm just highlighting similar cases out there. And in terms of the impact upon the rear garden of, oops, sorry, wrong one. Let's not go there. In terms of the impact upon the rear garden of number 29, again, the outbuilding would screen the extension largely from the main rear garden of this neighbour. So it's not contended that there would be a significant overshadowing impact on the rear amenity space in addition to the rear window. For the reasons that I've set out in the presentation and in the report, Chairman, I'm recommending that the application is approved in line with the conditions that are set out on page 52 of the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hilton. We have a speaker on this, and this is Councillor Lungley, who is the ward member for the area. So I'm sorry to keep you so long through the other applications, but it's the luck of the draw, the order in which they come out. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Longley, I was being distracted then. So I was just going to formally let you know, as soon as you're ready, the clock will start when you hit the red button, and you've got up to five minutes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I object to this proposal. I'm concerned about the fact that the proposed extension is only 28 inches from the kitchen window of the adjoining property, which is number 29, Asha Lane, reducing daylight, especially in afternoons. In addition, there will be a risk of flooding caused when water is displaced from the roof of the extension to the gutter, which is positioned on the existing outhouses, the downpipe of which is positioned at number 29. Having looked at the plans, I feel that had the outhouses not been there, the scope for an extension would have resulted in a more pleasing design. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Langley. So if that's all you want to say on it, that's fine. If you go back to the seat at the side there now. So Councillor Langley is objecting, and on behalf, and I think he's speaking on behalf of the neighbour, referring to the proximity to number 29 being something like 28 inches away, worried about loss of daylight, and also concerns about possible flooding as a result from rain coming off the roof of the proposed extension. I think those are the main points that were covered. Would you like to come back on those, please, Mr. Hilton?
Thank you, Chairman. So whilst it's acknowledged that the proposed rear extension element would be close to the neighbouring window, it is not considered, whilst there would be a potentially degree of loss of light to the kitchen window, it's not considered that there would be a significant loss as a result of the rear outbuilding, which already cuts a large amount of that light, and as well as the view out towards the back. As a kind of fallback position, as it were, if the extension weren't to be wrapping round the corner of the building, if it were solely a single-storey rear extension, the applicant could potentially extend out up to 3 metres under permitted development. That's obviously separate to this application. We have to assess what's in front of us. So it's not contended that there would be a harmful loss of light to the detriment of the living conditions of the neighbour. In terms of the flooding issue, there is obviously provision for rainwater collection with the existing downpipe. It is a fairly modest household extension. I have no reason to believe that it would result in an undue amount of runoff and flooding of the neighbouring property. The section where the outbuilding itself is fairly modest in width, so there'd only be a fairly small section of gully between the outbuilding and the extension that would be affected by the proposal. Majority of the water would run off into the guttering and elsewhere, I guess. So again, it's not considered that there would be a flooding impact.
Okay, no, that's fine, Mr. Hilton. Thank you for that. My first speaker is Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am concerned about the impact on 29's window, and in fact that drawing in front of us demonstrates that the kitchen window, the view from the kitchen window looks as if it was taken at an angle rather than directly where the proposed side extension would be. So I'd like clarification of that. I'd also like clarification of whether, because it's taken at that angle rather than straight through the window, where if the other diagram is to be believed, the side extension would be. In other words, if you took the photo from the other angle of the kitchen window, the side extension would be in front of it, wouldn't it? If the drawing is correct that we're being given. And the second thing is, are there any other side windows in 29?
Okay, so obviously the photo was taken at a oblique angle towards the application site, rather than straight out from that window.
It's taken out to the outhouse, isn't it? It's not taken out to the application site.
Chairman, if I can assist, perhaps. If I zoom in on this one, I think the point that Councillor Jones is making is dependent on which angle you look out of that window, depends what the impact of the extension is and what you see. So the so unfortunately the outhouse isn't shown on this plan, but the kitchen window is here, the outhouse is here. That picture is taken from within that room, generally looking across there. In terms of are there any other windows in the side of 29, that is the party wall between 29 and 31. So there are no windows in the side, that obviously, because that would be into the neighbouring accommodation. Whether there are windows that side, I don't know. Matt might be able to tell us, but clearly they're not impacted. If you were stood in that kitchen and you looked the other way, as you're suggesting, you would then look out to the neighbour's garden past the outbuilding, which is in this area. Does that help clarify that point? If we go back to the photograph again.
It does, because I was confused as to which angle you were referring to, and I don't know whether others were.
So if we go back to that photograph, as I said, that's the party wall between the two dwellings. The extension's going in there. If you stood here and looked out that way, you'd see past the outbuilding into the neighbour's garden, effectively.
Right, I understand that. And are there any other upstairs windows then?
Okay. So it's a single story extension. So the ridge height of the extension would be below the first floor windows of the adjoining neighbour.
Oh, there you go.
I just want to apologise to previous comments. I meant to say outlook towards the rear garden rather than application site. So if that caused any confusion.
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, it's much more clearer to me now than it was before.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think I know the answer to this. The height of the proposed extension is in paragraph 15, I think. It says there's currently a 1.6 metre high wall along the common boundary. The roof of the extension would be approximately 1.1 metres higher than that. So that comes to 2.7 at the point at which it linked the outbuilding. Sorry, could you go back to that picture that had the, that's it there. That's the outbuilding that's shared, in construction terms, it's shared between the two houses, isn't it? There's a wall in between, obviously. I assume from that the ridge height of that outbuilding is higher than the proposed height of the extension. Is that correct?
I think it is, isn't it?
Yes.
No. If we look at the rear elevation plan, the ridge height, or the height where it adjoins the back of the property, is higher than that of the outbuilding. Not massively so, but there is a slight difference there, as you can see from the rear.
Chairman, if I could put that into I'm already on. If I could put that into perspective in terms of these photographs, to help perhaps. It's a mono-pitch roof running up into the property. That is the highest point of the ridge, which you can see comes in just below the first floor windows. So if we go back to this picture, the extension would be would join the house at that point and come down to adjacent to the boundary, roughly the same height as the or just above the height of the eaves of the outbuilding. Does that help?
Thank you, Chair. So it's a sloping roof. So that I'm thinking in terms of the neighbours and the view from their kitchen window, the view out would be of a sloping extension roof that, as it drops down, is considerably lower. Sorry, could you keep the gable end photo there? Sorry. So the roof will slope down, and as far as the neighbours are concerned, in looking out of their kitchen window, that roof will be sloping down and will be much lower than the existing ridge of the gable. So it will be subservient to it. Now, Chair, on that sort of basis, it's difficult to see how there can be we can sustain an objection to this application, because the existing building, the outhouses, are considerably higher, and that is already blocking the view from the neighbour's kitchen, both of their own outhouse and the bit shared with the neighbours. So on that basis, Chair, I'd move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And Councillor Jones, you're seconding the recommendation as per the report. Councillor Smith, yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Looking at this and assuming that the compass points are in the right direction, in winter that's going to make that the neighbour's kitchen very dark, isn't it? Because it's due north of that wall.
We have an observation on that.
I can just confirm that it is due north, yes.
Yes, so it is due north.
Chairman, to add to that, yes, it will have some impact. The role of your officers and you as decision makers is clearly to come to a judgment as to whether or not that impact is unacceptable. It's a valid point, and it's a point that you must consider as the decision makers.
Thank you. Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Thank you. Can I just add to Councillor Smith's point? And I do fully accept what Councillor Edwards is saying, that when the pitch of the roof reaches the outhouse, it is at its lowest point. But of course, the neighbour's window is in such a position on the north side where the pitch of the roof is much higher, is in a higher position. It's somewhere between the low point at the outhouse and the high point just under the bedroom window. So there will be a considerable impact, perhaps in winter, maybe throughout the whole year, at that particular point where the kitchen window is. So, you know, I don't think we can sort of underestimate the effect that may cause.
Perfectly fair and understandable observation. Absolutely. I don't think there's anything to add to that, is there? Right. Well, Councillor Clark.
I was hoping not to speak on this, Mr. Chairman, but
a full and open meeting. People can speak whenever members can speak whenever they want.
At the time. Just on the points that are just being raised. I know we can't redesign an application because this is what's in front of us, but you could always refuse it for one particular aspect and they could come back with a free go with a revision. My question to Mr. Pegg or to Mr. Hilton really is, did any discussion take place as to whether, I don't know how I can describe this verbally without, but it's not a hip as such, but if you were viewing directly from the rear elevation, the right hand side of the extension, make that a pitch? Hip. A hip, yes. It's sort of like half a hip really, isn't it? A half hip. In order to mitigate the loss of sunlight going into next door's kitchen.
Okay, thank you. I can confirm there weren't any discussions on that point. It is an approach that's sometimes taken to bring down the height of walls when they're on common boundary. In this instance, it felt it wasn't necessary to engage in those discussions and to consider the plans that were before us. So no, that hasn't taken place.
So am I correct that the construction of, or the structure of the proposed roof is purely a roof void? It hasn't got any actual, well, not living space, there's clearly not enough room for living space, but there's nothing in there other than a roof void. Is that correct?
Potentially it's a bolted ceiling. I don't have the a cross section to show whether that's the case, but it's not any additional living space. It is just a ground floor. You've got the roof lights, so that would be to serve the ground floor, which implies it's a vaulted ceiling.
So it's an angled vaulted ceiling.
That's correct. Yes.
You look up at a.
You see, I originally was of the opinion that there's no problem with it, but I'm now starting to think that in order to mitigate the effect on the next door, that angled roof would be preferable, in which case I'm starting to verge towards not supporting this application.
Okay, well, thank you. Right. Well, we have had. Does anyone else want to speak on this? Because we have had it moved and seconded as per the recommendation. So, if no one else wants to make any comments, I think we can go to a vote. If we're all happy to do that. So, we're clear what we're voting on, aren't we? And we're clear on what the application is. We've asked the questions about the light and the angle of the roof and so on. So, I think we'll have a show of hands then. So, a show of hands. Those in favour of the application as per the report, please show.
7, Chairman.
That's 7. Anybody against?
4, Chairman.
4, 7, 4. And any no abstentions. So permission is granted, 7 to 4 in favour. So thank you for that. Right, that's the final application for this evening, and I will close the meeting at 22 minutes past 8, certainly to our friends in the public, but could I please ask members of the committee just to stay here for another few moments just for some information, something just to discuss with you. But it won't take long, don't worry.
Couple of minutes, Chairman.
Okay, that sounded very dramatic, didn't it?
It did, yes.
The reason is because Mr. Pegram is anxiously telling me he needs to talk to us after the end of the meeting, and so I thought I think we ought to indulge Mr. Pegram. So
Thank you,
what
Chairman.
did you want to tell us? Or?
Chairman, it was only to make you aware, I do need to do a briefing note for the wider membership. But as planning committee, there are some changes coming into force which affect potentially the way this committee operates. As of the 1st of October, or 1st of October onwards, any application that this authority approves can only be approved if there are pre-commencement conditions, if those conditions have been agreed with the applicant. So, for instance, if it said, before any work is carried out on site, tree protection shall be erected in accordance with details to be approved by the local planning authority, that is a pre-commencement condition. With the exception of outline planning permission and possibly reserve matters, I'm still looking into this, we could not impose that condition without the permission of the applicant. The idea of it is that the government feels, the government's in its consultation felt that if we impose too many pre-commencement conditions, even when the applicant's got his permission, he can't get on and build. And so what they are trying to do is to reduce the number of pre-commencement conditions that authorities put on planning permission. I will do a briefing note for the wider membership, as I say, Chairman, but I felt it's important because clearly if we are in debate and a member asks for an additional condition, which by the nature of it had to be a pre-commencement condition, we wouldn't effectively be able to issue a permission after the meeting until we'd gone away and agreed that condition with the applicant. If the applicant didn't agree to that condition, then my feeling is, or my view is, that that application would have to come back to this committee to determine whether they still wanted to impose that condition, and if it was so fundamental to the development and the potential impacts of that development, it might be that permission would be refused. Thank you, Chairman.
Does anybody have any questions, Councillor Clark?
I don't know, Chairman. Does anybody have any questions? Well,
yes, you do, don't you?
Yeah, because it obviously begs the obvious question, so what's the point of conditions? Yes. Because if I was an applicant, I would say, yeah, I don't agree to any of those conditions. So what's the point of them? I think that's just bonkers. And is that a guidance from MHCLG, or is that actual legislation that's been passed?
The primary legislation is the Neighbourhood Act, which I think, from memory, don't quote me, was it 2014 or 2017, Matt? I can't remember. It's probably 2014. The secondary legislation came out this year, which comes into force on the 1st of October and imposes a duty on us. It's not guidance. It is a duty. Effectively, what the regulations say is we cannot grant planning permission subject to a pre-commencement condition unless that condition has been agreed with the applicant, or they have failed to provide a substantive response to our approaches.
So there could be a situation then where an application, there could be a situation where an application is extraordinarily contentious. We believe that the material considerations are such that, yes, it will ultimately be approved, but in order to protect the impact on neighbours or whoever it may be, we want to, and in the past we've done this, impose conditions in order to mitigate the impact on neighbours. The applicant can just say, well, stuff you. I'm not interested in the neighbours. I don't care what I do to the neighbours. I'll just ignore the conditions.
Two things there, Chairman. Firstly, if that condition was so fundamental to address the impacts of the development and he didn't agree to it, our option as a local planning authority is to refuse permission. The other issue is we have got creative with the way we word conditions in recent years, because this has been a long time coming, I think. I can't remember when the actual consultation was. But, for instance, we used to say, before any development is commenced on site, you shall submit details of the facing and roofing materials. You may have noticed that in the reports now, we put development shall not proceed beyond foundation level until such time that materials have been agreed. So we've got a little bit creative to try and get around some of it. But there are some conditions which, by their very nature, will always be pre-commencement. As I say, contamination. You can't start developing on a site until you've established whether it's contaminated or not. So there are certain ones. The three that I can think of that have come to my mind is archaeology, contamination and tree protection. As I say, I stress it doesn't apply to outline permissions, because clearly the idea of it is that once you've got your permission, you can get on straight away. We are going to attack it as officers from a number of angles. Pre-application discussions. We will be seeking to improve the quality of submissions, if we can, so that, for instance, go back to the tree protection one, if there are trees on site, we will seek a plan from the applicant that shows those trees with the tree protection around it, and we can then condition that that tree protection is erected. It doesn't require the applicant to come back to us to discharge it. We can simply say, before you start the work, it's still, to a certain extent, is a pre-commencement element, but we can still say, carry on with that tree protection fencing in place before you start work.
So there. Councillor Jones.
Well, you mainly covered it. It's putting more of an emphasis on your preliminary work and ensuring that in particular trees is quite a likely one, and it's an issue for the council as a whole, that you do that work before it even comes as an application.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you got the staff to do that?
It does impose an additional burden on us, Chairman. It just means, to a certain extent, though, we have to do the work at a different stage in the process. So arguably, it won't necessarily be, fingers crossed, significantly more resource intensive, because we will just have to do those bits earlier in the process. Where it will cause us a problem is, as members are probably aware, we are supposed to deal with the majority of applications within 8 weeks. Obviously, if we can't reach negotiation either at pre-application stage or early in the process, we then have to serve a formal notice on the applicant to say the authority is minded to approve this application subject to the following pre-commencement conditions. They then have 10 working days to respond to that notice. We still need probably a week after that to deal with other bits and pieces of the process before the 8 weeks is up. So you can see how the process starts to get squeezed.
Councillor Thurman.
Maybe I'm wrong, or I don't know, but I think these new policies and stuff are probably aimed at the big sites rather than the small ones. Am I right there or not?
It applies to any application, any planning permission. As I say, there's a moot point whether it applies to reserved matters, because reserved matters is not strictly speaking a planning application. It's an application for the approval of matters reserved on an outline. So I need to try and find clarification for that. There is nothing out there at the moment, but to answer your question, it's not. I don't know if it's aimed at any particular type of development or developer, but it applies to all applications. So your householder, even.
We shall. Does anyone else want to say anything on this? I mean, this is hot news, hot off the press, in effect, isn't it? Well, certainly from our for us. But
I just felt, Chairman, it was important to tell you tonight, because clearly next time we meet, it will be in force.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
I will try and do a
briefing. On that note, can I thank you for your attendance and cooperation? Safe journey home. It's got quite a little bit exciting at one point, but these are emotive. That was a particularly emotive application. And we're going to go now.
We've done 12:15 before.